Bon, nous allons, si vous voulez bien commencer la conférence de presse de M. Blake Edwards. Je voudrais tout d'abord vous dire que je représente ici la revue Positif et que Gilles Jacob, il y a quelques mois, nous a demandé ce que nous voulions pour célébrer le 40e anniversaire de cette revue dans le cadre du Festival de Cannes. Nous n'avons pas été longs à nous décider. Nous avons d'abord pensé qu'il fallait rendre hommage à un artiste parce que le but de la revue, c'est de défendre des artistes. Et nous avons fait le tour de grands cinéastes que nous avons défendus depuis très longtemps, aussi bien Coppola que Fellini, que Wim Wenders, que Angelopoulos, Francesco Rosi, Martin Scorsese, etc. Et que nous sommes tous tombés d'accord sur le nom de Blake Edwards. Parce que d'abord, nous admirons, nous aimons ses films, ça fait presque 40 ans. Sa carrière correspond à peu près avec celle de la revue. Ensuite, parce qu'il est le dernier représentant de la grande comédie hollywoodienne, il est le seul pratiquement à faire cette comédie hollywoodienne qui a commencé avec Lubitsch, puis avec Hawks, etc., dont il est un des plus brillants représentants. Aussi parce que dans les festivals qui veulent dire fête, on ne voit pas tellement de films de fête, c'est-à-dire de comédie, et encore moins de comédies au palmarès. Il n'y a pas beaucoup de palmes d'or qui ont couronné des comédies. Donc c'était aussi l'occasion de montrer 10 films de Blake Edwards qui nous ont ravis et pour détendre un peu l'atmosphère parfois nerveuse des festivals. Donc je remercie beaucoup Blake Edwards d'avoir répondu à notre invitation et je remercie le Festival de Cannes de nous avoir apporté tout son soutien administratif, logistique pour pouvoir présenter ces films et accueillir ici Blake Edwards, qui n'est pas un habitué de ce genre de visite. C'est quelqu'un qui passe plus de temps à travailler qu'à faire la promotion de ses films. Donc nous sommes très heureux qu'il ait accepté de venir exceptionnellement dans le cadre de ce Festival de Cannes fêter l'anniversaire de notre revue.
I'm trying to see if anybody has a tie on, and I don't see one. Good. At least loosen it. God. Okay.
Bon, après ces mots d'introduction de Blake Edwards, est-ce que moi j'arrive pas à enlever ma cravate, c'est un gag, c'est le gag qui commence.
Tiziano Sossi, Velvet, Italy. I think there's a particular moment in your career, very extraordinary for me. Start in 1961 and finish in 1963. It starts with the Breakfast at Tiffany, and after with Experiment in Terror, and after in A Day of Wine and Roses. The particular moment because it seems that is an experiment in every type of movie, of genre of movie. And after you have made only film ironic, but with other elements that take from other genre of movie. Why in Days of Wine and Roses you have searched the drama, the complete drama?
Well, to answer that, one has to make a pretty big admission, and I think it keeps constantly coming up, and I think it finally needs to be addressed. You've got to remember that Breakfast at Tiffany's and Days of Wine and Roses, I didn't write them, so you can't give me credit for those films. You can give me credit for directing them, and I was very lucky and very honored to do so. But if my career was being fashioned at that point, it was being fashioned by somebody other than myself. I didn't sit down and say, well, this is one picture that will best express part of what I want to do. This is another that will express the dramatic side of me. It just happened that way. And fortunately, it happened that way.
Black Edwards, est-ce que vous connaissiez à l'époque où vous avez tourné The Party les films du français Jacques Tati?
I'm going to translate. Oh, I better.
Yes. When you made The Party, did you know the films of the French director Jacques Tati?
Oh, yes. I certainly did. He is one of my, for the lack of a better word, idols. I love Monsieur Tati. Why? I don't know how to answer that. Because I think he is a genius at comedy. That's like saying, why do you like Chaplin? Why do you like Laurel and Hardy? Why do you like Buster Keaton? It would be very difficult for me to say anything other than generalize. They touched something in me that made me love them. I suppose I could sit here and get very psychological about it, but I don't think that does it. Comedy is a very, very personal thing. And you either laugh and maybe you go away later on and say, well, I'd like to explore those reasons. But the physicality of the man, his ideas, the look of him, I can't say much beyond that. Wait now, let's see if this works.
But is there an influence of his films on yours? Est-ce qu'il y a une influence de ces films sur vous?
I'm not getting it in translate. Yes. Oh, yes, to be sure. Yes, very much so. He, along with some of the other gentlemen that I mentioned before.
Je pense par exemple à la scène du restaurant dans The Party, qui pour nous, Français, semble être peut-être un clin d'œil à Jacques Tati. Est-ce que c'était conscient chez vous? Est-ce qu'il y a des scènes particulières où vous avez pensé en les tournant à Jacques Tati?
No, I don't usually think of my heroes when I'm doing it. They're there to begin with. They influence me. They become part of whatever I am, and I go on from there. I'm sure it's unconscious. Yes, I'm sure somewhere they lurk and are there for me to draw from, but not on a conscious level.
Oui, Marc Vinchet, France Culture. Alors justement, pour prolonger cette réponse-là, est-ce que malgré tout, il y a une prolongation consciente, enfin, quel est le degré de conscience de la prolongation d'un film de Lubitsch muet qui s'appelle Si j'étais un homme en français, dont je ne connais pas le titre allemand, et qui a pratiquement, en tout cas dans lequel on reconnaît ou on reconnaîtra plus tard dans Victor Victoria, l'argument, c'est-à-dire un peu la question du travestissement d'une femme qui devient un homme, et avec une façon d'aborder de façon assez marrante le fait d'assumer ou pas l'homosexualité, le fait d'une relation entre deux hommes. Et ça, on trouve en tout cas dans ce film de Lubitsch, Si j'étais un homme, quasiment le synopsis ou le scénario de Victor Victoria. Est-ce que c'est conscient, pas conscient? Et puis, pour prolonger la question, qu'est-ce que vous devez à Lubitsch dans votre façon de travailler?
I think you better check with another German named Schunzel, who wrote the original Victor und Victoria. I didn't have anything to do with the original concept, the idea of a woman masquerading as a man. It was made 3 times, once in Germany, once in France, and I believe once in England. It was then presented to me, and at first I refused it because I felt, well, it's been done 3 times, how can I bring anything new to it? And then subsequently I got the idea of making the toddy character, the principal character in the Schunzel film, a homosexual, and therefore complicating the role-playing even more. I'm sure that if there was any conscious taking from Mr. Lubitsch you'll have to talk to Mr. Schunzel, who I don't think is around anymore. Certainly not on my part.
Wait, attendez. All right.
Sorry. I knew that recently you signed a contract with Roberto Benigni for playing the role of the son of Inspector Clouseau. I wanted to know more about it, and when you start shooting, the title, how do you think the story will be, and everything.
We start shooting on the 8th of June, and we'll shoot for about 14 weeks, about 8 weeks here, a couple of weeks in Jordan, 4 weeks of interiors in London. And it's true, Mr. Benigni will be playing the title role. Not much more to say than that, because we haven't finished casting. And excuse me?
About the story? Something about the story?
Oh, something about the story? Well, it has to do with the discovery that Inspector Clouseau has an illegitimate son, who in this... If you saw Shot in the Dark, it was about a murder case that introduced Inspector Clouseau somewhat into... actually, it was the second film that had Clouseau in it. It was not a Pink Panther. But in that, he had a minor affair with a lady named Gambrelli, Maria Gambrelli. So we discovered that... inadvertently, I guess is the word, that she and Clouseau got caught in a snowstorm, and it was he convinced her that the only way to stay alive was to have a sexual encounter. And she was so young then that she chose to stay alive. She didn't really realize the consequences. And as a result, and Mr. Benigni was the result. And we discovered that through, if you remember the character of Inspector Dreyfus, who went crazy several times. They had to lock him up in an institution because of Clouseau. And so by now Clouseau is dead, and he has become France's greatest detective, and they have, like we at home have a Martin Luther King Day, they now have a Clouseau Day. And they're having this grand celebration, and we meet Dreyfus again, who is now head of all police in France. And he's told that there has been a crime committed and that he has to go solve it, which happens to be a kidnapping of a princess from a fictitious Arabic country that we've used before. And he's caught in the middle of the celebrations. That everybody goes out and puts on a Clouseau mask, and he can barely get through the crowds because he's got hundreds of these giant Clouseaus all around him. But he survives because he knows that Clouseau is dead. They're not sure that he's dead, but they have evidence that he is. The last thing he was doing, he was the French government was being blackmailed by an inventor who had discovered a car fuel that he was making from. He owns a pig farm, and he's making it from methane from pig excrement. And he's developed a new car called the Merdmobile. And so Clouseau goes out to investigate, and of course makes the mistake of striking a match, and is blown up, and there is covers the countryside in pig excrement. So he's dead. Clouseau is now dead. And Dreyfus is very happy about that. So he goes down to the south of France to unravel the case of this kidnapping of big political implications. And a police officer, just a gendarme, arrests him, or actually runs into the back of his car and is thrown clear, for 15 yards through the air and lands in the dirt and jumps up and says, "That felt good." And it startles Dreyfus, and then so many things after that make it perfectly clear that there's some enormous similarities between Clouseau that he begins to investigate, and then discovers that this is the son. And the problem is the son has this gorgeous middle-aged mother who will do anything to keep her son safe, and up and to and including seducing Dreyfus, who loves the idea. Anyway, the young man goes on to, in spite of everything, solve the case. That's generally it.
Une question, je crois, au fond. Non, c'est fini. Alors, pardon, ici d'abord. D'abord et après vous.
Mr. Elvers, I like very much your films, so I'm very happy you're here. I always thought that there were a certain number of common things with the ones of another well-known director, Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder has an obvious Central European inspiration, while you're a 100% American director. So, two questions. Where does this typically European look and spirit of your films come from? And the second thing, how do you see the Wilder films, and how are your personal relations with him? Supposing you have some. Thank you.
Yeah, Billy and I are very good friends. It's a little hard to say how those things come about. I don't know. I admire Billy greatly, and I'm always taking lessons from my betters, and I consider Billy one of my betters. I'm not quite sure I understood the first part of your question, but
you are 100% American, but there is a European look to your film.
Yeah, I thought that was it. I really don't know. I honestly don't know, because it's been thought of me for a long, long time that I am European, either English or something that is European. And it's probably because I've spent so much time here. I can't think of any other reason for that. Maybe no more than other American directors, some other American directors, but I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't hear it in my speech. I don't necessarily see it in my films, but people keep telling me that it's there, and I'm perfectly willing to accept that. I'm delighted that I'm able to do that, even if I'm not aware of why I do it or how I do it.
It's a question about SOB, your former film, and the player. There might be a strong relationship between both. The player is well received in the festival here and has a good chance. Finally, we're able to smile and laugh about Hollywood. In SOB, I know it happened the other way around, that you were restricted from the business, couldn't work for quite a while, and nobody really wants to have that movie. Could you tell me a little bit about the different situation? What do you think? Is Hollywood able to laugh more about his own past? And like we had other movies recently, like Guilty by Suspicion, where they're talking about the Hollywood past in general.
I'm not sure what the difference is. One thing that is different is that SOB ended up being released by the studio that I made the picture about. And they all knew it. And what would you do under the circumstances? You know, if somebody knew that that you had just robbed a bank and you went to them to be your public relations person, it's kind of a clumsy situation. They didn't help that film at all, I have to tell you. Now, that's not a cop-out. I don't know whether that's the main reason that it didn't do all that well. I sense that it probably is something more. I sense that that there's maybe a more of a self-righteousness today even than there was before, and that everybody now is saying, well, that really isn't us, you know, that's somebody else. That certainly prevailed when they saw my film. And I haven't seen Mr. Altman's film yet. I know pretty much about it. And there probably is a strong difference between the two. I don't know whether his is as great an indictment as mine was. But I do know that it's more of a literal indictment. Mine was more of a kind of crazy house indictment. I dealt more with the almost surreal aspects of what happens there. And I stayed away from getting as real as he was. And yet everything in my film is based on absolute reality. I'm very much interested in seeing it because on one hand it's a little discouraging that you're the forerunner of something like that and that it didn't really take off. And yet now is considered, in a lot of quarters as being quite a good film, which pleases me. But I can't say much more than that because I haven't seen his film. Excuse me.
You haven't ceased to entertain us with intelligence during the years. Also, you just said that you feel half European. I would like to have your opinion of the present state of, let's say, Hollywood's health, because very much it is discussed about the dropping of audience. Well, you know not sense, about all those ready-made movies, that is, the cliché movies and so. And connected with this first question, if you have seen Robert Altman's movie, The Player, I don't know.
No, I have not.
You haven't seen.
No, I have not.
Then, okay. Then only your opinion about Hollywood status just now.
My opinion about Hollywood?
Yes, now that is in
present?
terms of in present, in very present.
I don't think it's changed that much. I think the players are the same. I think that certain needs are different and have to be fulfilled. But I think that essentially it's all about power and politics and a lot of unethical, immoral shenanigans on one side, and then there's a whole group of Hollywood people, more today than ever before, who are much more decent, much more exclusive in their personal lives. There's a change somewhat in the studio system, although you still have Disney, which is a big, powerful entity, as you did in the past. You don't quite have the same thing because of the difference in contract players like they used to have. The power of a Warner or a Cohen over the people under contract doesn't exist that much anymore. There is much more power in the agencies and in the stars themselves. The balance is almost the same, and yet it's because it's kind of circular and it keeps sort of moving back to the center all the time. So it really essentially hasn't changed an awful lot. Look what happened, not too long ago with Mr. Buchwald and things like that, and the whole system of double books and the enormous grosses that films take in, and they look at you straight and say, but we haven't made a nickel from that. And there are people who sit around and believe it because they choose to, and they perpetuate the myth and they continue the corruption. And I'm a big critic of the business. I'm a big critic of the stars that today take enormous salaries and push costs way out of proportion. But at the same time, I have to say I understand it, because if they don't do that, they're going to get robbed blind. So I don't know where it ends. When I start talking about it, I go in that kind of circular motion that I was describing. That for a moment I think, well, it is a little better. The filmmaker's got a little more power now, and he's more acknowledged. And then I think of certain instances, and I say, but this is pretty much the same. So all in all, I don't see that it's changed a great deal.
But in terms of creativity?
Excuse me?
In terms of creativity, of creation?
Oh, I think that possibly that has changed because the power is more in the filmmaker now. But then again, I stop and hesitate and say, well, wait a minute, though. But there's an awful lot of control of that creativity at this point. And the creativity is getting out of control, too. You know, and we're going through things that are typical that we've gone through forever and ever. Soaring costs and budgets out of control, things like that. It's tough to sit up here and be a critic of the system, although I am, because it's a place that has given me, one way or another, my career. But I still, I think a child should be able to criticize the parent.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Edwards, Monty Reed, FilmNet.
Hi.
In all of your films, of which would you say you developed most as a director, and why?
I developed most as a director?
In which of your films, in which one of your films would you say you developed most as a director, and why?
That's a really difficult question. First of all, I don't like to take a look at myself and my developing. I like to just let that happen. If it's going to happen, it happens. And to sit around and study oneself to that degree is it's like explaining why a joke should be funny. If you don't laugh, it's not funny. And no matter what I tell you, it's not going to be funny. And if to sit around and I'd prefer to do that on the analyst's couch and have. But I'm not sure I would ever be able to analyze that, because each time I get done with it, I wish, oh God, I wish I could do it again. And I'm dissatisfied mostly, and I see it and I cringe, and then sometimes there's some good things that happen about it. And also, if you have a success, I don't just mean box office, I mean if you feel successful about something that you do, it has a tendency to block out something that you did to a certain degree. It's very hard to go back and be objective about what happened in the past. It's a little like having a toothache. You know, if you had one 2 years ago and you said, this is the worst toothache I've ever had in my life, you're liable to say that again in 2 years, and it's very hard to compare the pain. Very hard for me to compare progress. I can tell you, that I'd like to live another 100 years because I think I can keep progressing. I think every film that I do, I see terrible mistakes that I make, and I'm always fascinated in why something that I thought was very good, evidently the audience didn't. And it's a constant struggle to keep your head above those kind of criticisms and to not be swayed, which I have been, by saying, well, okay, I'm going to figure out a way to really be commercial with this and have another major hit. I'm going to do 10 again. And that's death when you start thinking that way. You just have to, as I say, I sort of follow what God puts in my way and sort of go on with it. I wish I could be more specific, but I just can't.
I would like to ask you a precise question. You come with a print of Darling Lily, which has not been announced. It's the surprise that you brought with you. And it's the first time we are going to see your own editing of Darling Lily, because the film was not released as you intended. So can you tell us about what happened to the film and what is the difference?
Well, if you saw SOB, you know that that was kind of my answer to what a particular studio did to me. I felt, anyway, that they did to me. I'm sure they will say, well, he did it to himself. But that's an argument that can go on and on. And the film that was at the hub of that controversy was Darling Lily. And I won't get into the details because they're lengthy and boring. However, suffice it to say, it just about ruined me emotionally, physically, every sort of thing. Eventually, after going through another There were two films that did it. Lily was the first and Wild Rovers was the second, which finally made me say, okay, I'm going to Europe. I'm going to live in Europe. I'm going to stop directing. I'm going to be a writer, and I'm never going to go back to this again. But I had these terrible fights with the people that had just then taken over Paramount. And eventually they sold the film to some other releasing company or to another company. They released it rather badly. It wasn't that good. And it was kind of a pet of mine because I put a lot of love into it. Not only because I was making a film that I enjoyed, because my wife was in it and we had just met, and it was a great adventure for me. So time passes, and it's forgotten, and I've pretty much forgotten. And I got a call from Paramount, from their television department, telling me that they were going to release Darling Lily on a Laserdisc, and asking me, they said, we've found 2 70mm prints, we found an extra track here that doesn't fit anywhere, and the strange thing about the music, and I laughed, and I said, well, I'm not surprised, because it was a total catastrophe. The people did not know what they were doing, and they're cutting behind my back, and they said, well, would you come down and help us straighten this out? And I said, listen, they crucified me once. I'm not going to come back and crucify myself a second time. That's crazy. You've got to release it. Go release what's there. But I'm certainly not going to tell you where to find these things. And the young man that was talking to me said, well, I know I know some of what happened. He said, would it entice you if I suggested that you come down and make your original cut? And I nearly fainted because, as far as I'm concerned, when things like that happen, the studios are like the mafia. They'll knock off the whole earlier regime, get rid of the whole family, say that they were scum, but you dare criticize the mafia and, you're in big trouble. And I couldn't believe that anybody, I knew this kid wasn't long for this world. They were going to nail him to the wall. And I said, well, if you really mean that, I said, because I think it can be done. I said, I know what you're going to find out. You're going to find out that no outtakes exist. None of that stuff exists anymore. But this is a strange child, this film. The big problem that we had was that Mr. Bluedorn and Mr. Evans, who were running the studio, and particularly Mr. Bluedorn at one point, was determined, because he had Julie Andrews, Sound of Music, and in this film, Mary Poppins, that they were going to use every inch of film. One day we were shooting, and she was walking along in France with Rock Hudson. They were strolling, and I heard this voice say, "Why isn't she singing?" And this is the way they thought, and they had spent this enormous amount of money against my arguing on second unit, and they wanted every foot of film of the planes flying. And by midway, I was saying, listen, this is not it really shouldn't be a musical, fellas. You got to get rid of some of this stuff. I made a mistake. Let's take some numbers out. It's wrong. So what we suffered from was too much, not too little. Most directors are suffering because studios, well, as you were saying, Billy Wilder, they took out 2 whole episodes of Sherlock Holmes. And I said, all I want to do, and I know exactly where to do it and how to do it, I want to shift some sequences around, but essentially I want to pull stuff out. Bottom line is I took 40-some minutes out in 3 afternoons of cutting. And there's some little places that you might not notice are a little choppy because obviously we had cut negative already, but so we just really cut picture. And that's my cut. So if you see it and you don't like it, okay, this time. It's my fault. It's not somebody else's. If you like it, it's my fault.
So it's the first time we see a shortened version,
nobody's
the director's version.
Yeah, nobody's seen it except a few of my close friends. We ran it the other day, and a few of the people from the festival that happened to be there while we were running it.
Mr. Edwards, which of your movies is your favorite one, and what scene of the party made you laugh more during the shooting?
You know, I always say that's, and I can't be original with this answer. It's been answered this way before, but truly, your films are like your kids, you know, and you've got some kids that are great and some kids that go to reform school, and and you may hate them for the time being, but you'd never set out to make a kid that goes to reform school, and they are your children, and so you love them all. There's some that I guess if I had to really admit that I like maybe a little bit better than most, but it's hard for me to really pick my favorite. If I had to do it like that, I'd say Victoria.
Excuse me, if I go back to the same matter before, I want to know the title of the film with Benigni, how much it would cost, and if you have other future projects.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
The title of the movie, how much it would cost, and if you have other future projects. Thanks.
Future projects I can talk about. How much it'll cost, I don't dare.
Why not?
A lot. Unfortunately, a lot. I'll tell you this. The Return of the Pink Panther cost less than $3 million, Tony? Less than 2.5. The Return of the Pink Panther was less than 2.5 million. This will cost well over 10 times that much. And it's crazy.
10 times
there's
10 times.
10 times, more than 10 times. It's a shame the way costs have soared. There is nothing different production-wise in this film. In fact, I would bet you that if you really compared the two, Return of probably had more production value than this does.
The title and the title.
We're calling it for now The Son of the Pink Panther, but I'm not sure that that's what it's going to be.
Other projects?
Yes, I have several. One of them is very difficult to do because of the casting. It's it's a difficult casting. It's a book written by Saul Bellow called Henderson the Rain King. And that's one project. The other project that we have that we're currently working on is a film that's tentatively titled Revenge, that has to do about background of the IRA and English MI5. Get into some drama for a change. Both of those are dramas, by the way, although Henderson has great overtones of humor. And those are the two that we're working on, although I can't say that either one is going to be the next one at this point. I sort of throw them up in the air and see what comes down first.
About, you mentioned another film that was problematic with the studio, is a film that a lot of people in France at least like very much, called Wild Rovers. And is there a chance to see your version of this film? And what happened to the film exactly?
No, there'll never be a chance of seeing my version. There's a chance of seeing something that approximates my version. My version was only seen by a class at the University of Southern California. I decided, I knew what was going to happen. It was in the cards. It was happening all along. And I knew that I had to show it to somebody at least once, so that there would be probably as many as are here that at least went out into the world having seen the one that I did. And then they cut it to pieces. In those days, I had no control over those things. I didn't have final cut, and although, you know, the director is supposed to get his cut, I did get my cut, and then they just put it back in the cutting room and did what they wanted to. So it doesn't mean much if you say the director has a cut. And I'm not sure at this point what state it's in, except I know that it's the longer version. And mine was quite a long version. It wasn't typical Western, and I consider it one of the best films I've ever done. The one that I did, not the one that they cut. So you'll see something close to it.
But it was close to you because you were born in the West and you wrote
Yeah.
westerns when you were a scriptwriter. So, and it's your only western. So what
Yeah.
was so private in the film? Or
Well, I think just that. I think that because my heritage is essentially the West. I'm part American Indian. I grew up on those wonderful westerns and the Saturday afternoon cowboys that you'd go and see, and I love that part of it. I was riding a horse when I was 5, not anymore, but doing pretty well at it. And as you said, the first film that I did, the first film that I wrote and produced and acted in, was a Western that got me started. And I wanted to, I felt that there may be a place for something that was a little different in terms of a Western, a little different in terms of telling a story about the West, which was, I had sort of grown up now, and I wasn't just a kid from Oklahoma, and I was hopefully a little more sophisticated and a little more educated and a little more someone who recognized that the Greek tragedies also had a place just like Westerns, and so I decided to sort of combine the two, and it's a tale of two drifters, so to speak, a young one and an old one. They're both me. And one who just wants to go lie in the sun in Mexico because he's seen it all, and the other one who wants to, really do something before he gets to that point with the old man. And so they decide to rob a bank. It's that silly, and they open Pandora's box, and it's inevitable that they'll die because of this. And that's the story. And if you see it, maybe you'll see what it's all about with me. At least for me, it's one of my best things.
D'une manière générale, quand vous tournez un plan, est-ce que vous avez des principes de base que vous suivez, que vous conservez film après film, sur par exemple le choix des objectifs ou les mouvements de caméra, ou la distance entre les caméras et les acteurs?
Well, one hopes it isn't always the same. I guess any one of us, any filmmaker can probably be identified, like a painter. You look at it and say, certainly you can look at something like Picasso or Magritte or whatever. I'm naming some of my favorites. But no, I don't have that kind of a plan. I don't work that way. I work very freely, but very rigidly in the final analysis. The party, for instance, is mostly improvised. There were only 30 pages of script, and 30 pages mostly consisted of character descriptions and a sort of step continuity. So you knew that it had to start here and had to progress here, and even that was subject to spontaneous decision on the set. And I had 4 walls. It was a real house. And I have 4 walls on all my sets, unless they're so simple and only a few lines, because when I go into those sets with my actors, I've been told that at one point in my life that I got to be known for the director who said, "Okay, show me." And that's true. I admire actors a lot. I like actors a lot. I don't admire all of them, but I like them a lot. And it's fun, really enjoyable to see what they bring to it. And if I didn't do that, it'd be a shame, because quite a lot of them are very, very bright people and have a concept that maybe I didn't even think of about the role. And then I become a kind of editor, and I begin to work with them. And because after all, 9 times out of 10, they have my script. And we sort of construct it. And then, once it's constructed, I say, okay, let's go through it again. Then I begin to look for where my camera's going to be. It depends on what kind of a film it is, too, because if it's a Days and Wine and Roses, I made a conscious decision that I didn't want to be cute, clever at all with my camera. I didn't want anybody to say, "Isn't that an interesting shot?" I didn't want anybody to be conscious that there was a camera around. So I kept, I was constantly, I wanted to you know, it would pique my interest, and I'd think, oh, wouldn't it be great to get under the bed here? But I didn't do that. When I did Experiment in Terror, it was the kind of film that, like a Hitchcock, where you want to get interesting angles. The camera becomes a very integral part of all of that in a different way. So that can change. If it's comedy, then I shoot more in a proscenium look. It's more like looking at a stage. If you'll notice, you'll see that I'll have a lot of things going on at once. And I like that better than saying to the audience, okay, you're supposed to look at this. I'll do that sometimes too. But in comedy mostly, it's fun to let you survey the proscenium and you know, and be surprised that when, I just was thinking, when you play a whole scene with Jack Lemmon and Peter Falk at dinner with a moose head over, and when they run out, you run past you're still in the proscenium, you run past the wall and you see the other end of the moose. Quick, like that, and maybe only a few people catch it, but that's fun for me. And so that's the way I do it.
Ed Scheid in Pittsburgh Newsweekly. I've enjoyed your collaborations a lot with Julie. Do you have any future plans?
Well, yeah. It's not film at this point. We're planning on taking Victor Victoria to Broadway.
Oh, when would that be?
Next year.
Do you have any other cast members?
No, not at this point. Unfortunately, my dear friend, Mr. Preston, has moved on. He'll
be hard to replace in that.
Yeah, he will be. He was supposed to do it, and couldn't be with us.
Do you know when it would be next year on Broadway?
No, I'm not sure, because this is really, we've just decided, and so we're scurrying about saying, who wants to put up the money?
I'll look forward to seeing it there.
Thank you.
Oui, toujours par rapport au travail, on parlait donc là du côté un petit peu technique, la caméra, comment placer la caméra. J'aimerais aussi savoir, alors à l'élaboration avant, techniquement aussi, comment se prépare chez vous un scénario. On connaît tous cette photo célèbre de gens de studio qui sont censés élaborer de l'humour et du comique, hein, les gagmen qui sont tristes à pleurer. Est-ce que vous êtes triste à pleurer quand vous préparez un film et comment travaillez-vous avec votre scénariste? Et là aussi, comment est-ce qu'on met l'humour en place et le rire en place pour que ça marche après quand on est sur un plateau?
Well, usually I don't work with my scriptwriter. It's usually me. I've written certainly most of my comedies, sometimes in collaboration with. But then when I get ready to shoot, I'm not working with him usually, or her. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I try to maintain a kind of spontaneity. I try to make it feel like it is improvised. I have the ability, and quite truthfully, to, having written the script and know the characters and dialogue intimately, because I created them, to absolutely forget what the words are. And sometimes I will have to turn to my script person and say, did they say that right? Because it gives me the ability to see it in a way for the first time. I'm really not seeing it for the first time, but I'm close to it. And so once the script is done, and once I know I'm going to make it, and I've worked with the art director, and I know what my sets are going to be, and I've fantasized about it, you know, in my spare time before I go to sleep or whatever. I go in as fresh as I can with it, like it's a whole new thing. I know some directors have it very plotted out, even to the extent that they'll get an artist who will almost do it scene by scene. Hitch used to do that a lot, but he did it specifically when he wanted to do a certain kind of a gag. But I don't do that unless there's an action sequence that I want to be sure of. So it's just once script written, once I'm ready to go with it, I try to make it as new as possible. Go in and look at it for the first time if I can. and then go from there.
Monsieur Black Edwards, dans votre film L'amour est une grande aventure, vous faites un clin d'œil à la France en donnant à votre héros un préservatif bleu-blanc-rouge. Est-ce que cette idée vous est venue en sachant que la France a la réputation d'être le pays de l'amour?
You may have the reputation, but it's not exclusive to condoms. And red, white, and blue is also the American flag too, so you don't have the exclusive colors. No, I wasn't thinking France particularly. I was thinking condoms. What can I tell you? Now, to be a little serious about it, it was, I couldn't do a sexual farce without taking into consideration what's going on in the world today. And you can't, as far as I'm concerned, you can't do those kind of scenes, or you shouldn't do those kind of scenes, without having feeling responsible about AIDS and this whole new world that we live in. I think I get rather horrified because I have 2 teenage daughters, and you can say, hey, be careful just long enough. You can't sit down and more than a couple of times and give them parental advice, and they go out and see film, and there people are not even acknowledging that there's a problem, and doing it in the road, as the Beatles say, and it's a bad example for our kids. It really is. We ought to have a great deal of responsibility when we're playing around, when we are making films about sex.
Amir Labac, Folha de São Paulo, Brasil. Mr. Edwards, we are not going to see all your films here in Cannes, only a selection of 11 of them. I would like to ask you did you like the selection of films?
Oh yeah, I do, because I think that probably, as I said, I love all my children, and I've neglected some here by suggesting these 11, although they weren't entirely my suggestion. Sooner or later, I guess you got to fish or cut bait. If somebody says you got to pick 11 or whatever it is, you pick them. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't have maybe put something else in their place. I don't know.
2 dernières questions, car The Party va bientôt commencer.
What do you think about your incredible sensibility with women and the actresses in your movies? There are few directors that have this type of sensibility. I think to the roles of Audrey Hepburn, Leah Remick, Julie Andrews, Bo Derek, Ellen Birkin, are all parts of a strong women with a strong character, and I think it depends from your sensibility in the direction of these women.
What is your question? Do you want me to talk about it?
What do you think about?
You want me to talk about it a bit? Well, I like women. I really always liked them, and they're wonderful and mysterious and drive me crazy and make me laugh a lot and make me want to kill them sometimes. And I find them infinitely more interesting than most men. I'm a man and I know myself fairly well, and I guess we all aren't that much different. But they really are. And they have things that are really mysterious that we can never know. They have babies, and I would love to find out what that's all about, really experience it if I could, but I can't. So I think about it and I write about it. And because they've always kind of controlled my life, although I won't admit it too much, I'd like to find out how come, and I just find them fascinating, and so I explore the best I can, and that's why they keep coming into my films in one way or another. And of course, I feel that that we haven't paid enough attention to them. I think they've gotten a rotten deal for the most part. I think they've got a long way to go, and we ought to start helping them a little more to get there.
Merci beaucoup. C'est l'heure d'aller voir The Party. Merci Blake Edwards et merci d'être venu.
Thank you. Okay? Very good. Good. I think it was better to aim on women. Oh yeah, you bet.